Hello, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mingus, and I welcome you guys back to Unit Analysis, the series where we take a look at units from Advanced Wars. And today we're checking out the big guns, the medium tank. Used to be the strongest vehicle in Advanced Wars 1 until it was later eclipsed by the Neo tank and the Mega tank. But I would say that to this day, the medium tank remains an incredibly useful vehicle. It is extremely important. Knowing when to build it can decide wins or losses, and if you've been paying attention to many of my replay commentaries as of late, that is one of the criticisms I have been getting, that I don't build Neo-tanks at the right moments and that I don't utilize them correctly when they're built. So this is going to be an incredibly important video for those of you who want to improve your Advanced Wars games. These are advice I've gotten from very highly rated players. But first, let's take a look at the medium tank's basics and talk about what it's supposed to do as a unit. Of course, the medium tank, it may just seem like a bigger version of the tank, but it's so much more than that. It has some very important roles. Now, as for its price, it will cost you more than twice as much as a regular tank. It costs 16,000, so it's very expensive. However, just because it's worth 16,000 doesn't mean that you can just churn one out as soon as you reach that goal. I would say that in order to comfortably build medium tanks, you probably need an income of about 18 to 19,000. Now, the reason behind that is, of course, you don't want to have your idle bases. So in order to comfortably build a mega tank, unless you want to like have an idle base, which is very bad, you need to build a medium tank and 2 infantry, which will cost you 18,000, and then you might have to take into account any repairs, because if you leave units on a city, they will be repaired and drain your funds. So I would say like 18 to 19,000, maybe 20,000 income is when you can comfortably start to tech up, as they call it. That is an expression that the Advanced Wars pros use. Teching up basically means that you are now taking the match into the late game and you're building the more expensive units. You know, in the early game, you'll usually see the less expensive vehicles rolling around like tanks, recons, artillery. And then as the income gets higher and the match progresses into a more advanced stage, both players will tech up and start building the more expensive units like medium and neo tanks. But knowing when to tech up is extremely important. Some people, I would say, the most common beginner mistake that people make is that they don't tech up quickly enough. They tend to remain on building tanks, battlecopters, and the other cheap units because they simply don't want to invest most of their money into one big scary unit. Now, the medium tank, as I said, it looks like just a bigger version of the tank, but it is a lot more than that. It is a lot less mobile than the tank. The tank has 6 move, the medium tank has 5, so it's a lot slower, so it's not very good at getting where you want it to be. It also has a very low supply of fuel, at 50, so the medium tank is actually pretty liable to run out of gas, especially if you go up against Drake, who drains your fuel. Against a couple of tsunamis, the medium tank will often be immobilized if you don't place it on a city or you have an APC to accompany it. It does have a nice supply of shots though, 8 shots. It will usually not run out of ammo, so that's not something I would be very worried about. However, one thing that is very bothersome with the medium tank, at least when you play in fog, is that it is completely blind on its own. It has one vision. It cannot see shit, so it will just get trapped on its own. You need recons or infantry in cities, I'm saying, or you need infantries in mountains to scout out the path ahead, or else the medium tank will not be able to do anything. Having one vision is awful. So when going up against medium tanks in fog, you can actually utilize a strategy of targeting your enemy's recons and trying to shoot infantry in mountains so that the medium tank just becomes blind and thus utterly useless. So yeah, you can definitely shut down a medium tank by taking away its eyes. Now, one of maybe the most useful thing a medium tank is used for is wall breaking. Now, wall breaking refers to being able to kill a unit in one shot and then progress through and target the units in the back. This is extremely important to do because in most Advanced Wars games, your enemy will place their units in kind of like a wall formation, and they'll have their squishy units in the back. And then firepower is king, because having above or reaching the 100% firepower mark means that you can safely wall break and then bust through their wall, which is important if you want to go on the offensive. Now, medium tanks can wall break infantry on roads without any firepower increases, which is very nice. Now, as always, while I am showing this as Jess, I have turned firepower bonuses off, so she doesn't get the 10% firepower increase. But every CO in the game, except for those with a firepower decrease, can do this. Every CO will be able to do 105% damage against infantry, so they can always wall break infantry as long as they're on roads. They can also sometimes wall break infantry when they're on planes. They do 94% damage. So this becomes a coin flip. As you all know, in Advanced Wars there's a 0 to 9% luck modifier, meaning that it's a bit of a coin flip whether or not you reach 100% or not. If you play a CO like Jess, who gets 10% extra firepower, this is actually guaranteed to happen. Or if you're playing Advanced Wars by Web and you have a comm tower, for example, then your medium tanks can safely wall break infantry on planes, which is very nice. If you don't have any firepower increases, it becomes a coin flip, and as we see right here, we failed it. So if I was relying on killing this infantry to get to a unit in the back, then I would be in trouble right now. Medium tanks cannot interrupt captures on their own, obviously. It's quite hard to do, actually. Even a max medium tank cannot safely do this. You need a big firepower increase in order to interrupt a cap on your own. But if you're using your medium tanks to interrupt caps, then you're probably not utilizing them correctly. That being said, if it's the only thing they can do, then of course you should go ahead and do it. But as I've been criticized for before, you shouldn't really send your medium tanks around and take out infantry. They should be in the center of the combat, where they're most useful. If you remember my game versus Humpelmann in the tournament, I took one of my medium tanks, and instead of sending it into the center, I had it go around the outer edges of the screen and hunting infantry, which is very tempting. I mean, it can almost kill an infantry every single turn, which is very nice, but it also means that the medium tank is basically just a glorified recon at that point, which is not very good. Now, one of the biggest reasons you would have to build a medium tank is when your opponent has tanks. As D just told me, once you see 3 tanks on the board, that's your cue to build a medium tank. Instead of building a 4th tank and then having your opponent counter with a 4th tank of their own, and there's 5 tanks, 6 tanks, 7 tanks, whenever you see 3 tanks packed together, that is your cue to build a medium tank. Of course, if you can afford it, that is. You shouldn't rush it out if you only have 16,000, leaving your bases idle. But once you get a medium tank into the center of the fray, all these tanks will now be zoned out, because medium tanks absolutely decimate normal tanks. They do 85% base damage, so they can't wall break tanks unless you have a very big firepower increase. I do believe Max can do it, and I do believe Jess with a comm tower can do it. But it is very hard to do otherwise. But you're not really building medium tanks to wall break tanks, you're building them to kill tanks. They counter tank. They hard counter tanks. They do extremely well against them. Here, I did show this in my tank video, but here's a simulation of 4 tanks getting the first strike on a medium tank out on a road, which is like the dream scenario. This will practically never happen. And as you can see, even though these tanks have a combined value of 28,000, which is more than a Neo tank, mind you, they're not doing great against this medium tank at all. And again, this is the best possible situation they can be in. They all get the first strike, and the medium tank is completely unprotected. And still, they are not extremely effective against the medium tank. So I would go as far as to say that medium tanks are the hard counter to tanks. They do amazing against them. So whenever a medium tank is out on the field, tanks kind of have to retreat. They get zoned out, and the match will progress into the late game. So yeah, that's a good rule of thumb. You see 3 tanks together in one spot and you can afford it, that's when you tech up to medium tanks and get them into the center. Don't have them go around on the fringes of the battlefield and shoot infantry. That's a very bad way to utilize them. You want them in the center of the attention where they can do the most damage. Now, here's a simulation with mechs, by the way. I would just like to point out that mechs are also an awful counter to medium tanks. While mechs are extremely, they are extremely cheap, and they actually do as much damage to medium tanks as tanks do, which is kind of funny. So it's definitely more cost effective. I mean, if you can get a lot of mechs to strike the medium tank, then they actually do better than the tanks cost effective wise. But this simulation that I'm showing right here, it's never going to happen. I'm just gonna say this right away. Like, you'll never get to surround a medium tank with mechs. Now, if you do, well, maybe they can do something, but overall, I wouldn't say mechs are fantastic against medium tanks. More often than not, they'll just get killed. However, how does the medium tank measure up to the Neo tank? Well, if they get to strike the medium or the Neo tank out in the open, they actually do sort of okay. But this will almost never happen because the Neo Tank is faster than the medium tank. And if the Neo Tank is on defensive terrain, you can just forget about it. More often than not, the Neo Tank will actually first strike the medium tank. And I would actually go as far as to say that they hard counter medium tanks in this way. Because of their extra movement, they'll usually get the first strike. Maybe not in fog, but definitely out of fog. So if you see your opponent building Neo Tanks, you do not want to build medium tanks. Neo Tanks will shut down medium tanks pretty hard. So it's kind of like, it's not even a weapon triangle. It's just Neo Tanks counter medium tanks counter tanks. It's really that simple. Now, the medium tank does have the ability to wall break a number of vehicles. It can one-shot recons. And again, it actually does the same damage to most vehicles in the game as it does to infantry. So again, as long as they're on roads and maybe on planes, if you have a small firepower increase, then the medium tank can actually wall break a lot of different vehicles, which is very nice. Now, in most Advanced Wars by Web maps, you will usually have a comm tower, so this becomes even more reliable. So medium tanks actually become pretty good wall breakers against most vehicles in the game. And being able to wall break is extremely important, as you know, because in almost every single competitive Advanced Wars match, you will see a wall of enemies in front of you, and you can either attempt to stall, or you can attempt to break through them. And well, if you're being attacked, then most likely you will have to wall break at some point. So the medium tank is pretty good for that. However, the medium tank is quite vulnerable to indirect fire. It takes 55% damage from the rockets out in the open. If the medium tank is on defensive cover, it takes a little bit less, but most of the time, medium tanks are like indirect magnets. They will get target fired by every indirect on the enemy side because they're so expansive. So, I would say indirects are a pretty good counter to medium tanks, especially considering the medium tank is quite slow. I like to use medium tanks in conjunction with other lighter vehicles. Basically, if you want to target the vehicles in the back, usually what I do is I use the medium tanks to wall break the units in the front, and then I move in with recons and tanks to pick off the artillery and rockets in the back. That's usually how I tend to use them at any rate. And I will say that if you're playing with a CO with a movement increase, like Adder or Jess, the medium tanks become a lot better, because of course one of the biggest problems with them is that they're quite slow, so it's not always easy to get them to where you need them to be. So that extra 1 or 2 points of movement will really make them better. Bombers shut down medium tanks pretty hard. They do 95% base damage to them, so it's a coin flip whether they kill them on roads or not. And on planes, they will kill them with a slight firepower increase. Battlecopters don't do a lot of damage to medium tanks, but it is still a pretty hard engagement for the medium tank to take. And if there are multiple battlecopters, they will usually whittle down the medium tank pretty fast. The medium tank can't really do much back to the battlecopter, so while they don't take a lot of damage, it is still a losing engagement. So I would say that battlecopters can be a hard counter to, or not a hard counter, they're a soft counter to medium tanks. So something you gotta keep in mind. Now, lastly, I just want to show how the medium tanks do against ships. This is not something you'll see a lot, but it's funny nevertheless. Yeah, medium tanks don't do shit to battleships. However, they do actually do decent. Well, actually, no, they don't do damage to subs, but they do actually do decent damage to landers and cruisers. So while subs and battleships are quite resistant to tank fire, cruisers are not. But cruisers are bad. So I mean, this is just another reason why I shouldn't build cruisers. Can't counter medium tanks. Horrible unit. This was actually supposed to be a lander, but the damage they would deal is around 50%. So, yeah. A bit of a useless trivia here. I just wanted to show how they perform. So yeah, medium tanks. A very important unit. I would say knowing when to tech up is the most important thing about the medium tank. Being able to tech up, making sure that you have a good capture game so you can get that medium tank out before your opponent. Again, good rule of thumb, you see 3 tanks together, clumped together in the center. That's your crew to build a medium tank. Build them to wall break lighter vehicles and infantry, but stay clear of indirects, as your medium tanks will basically be beacons for them. So yeah, I think that the medium tank is probably one of the most important units, at least going into the late game, and I really like it. They're great units. They're not so expensive that they are completely impossible to build, but still, they are quite an investment, and how you use them can determine the match. I mean, in some matches I build a medium tank, they go out and they get shot by an artillery in the fog, and I just lose. It's incredibly annoying. Other times, medium tanks have won me the match, where they have basically been able to ward off the opponent's tank aggression. I mean, you can almost be outnumbered like 2-1 with tanks, and then the medium tank comes in and just completely shuts down that game. So they can be incredible game changers. but you can also lose them and lose the game. So a high risk, high reward unit, I would say. Anyway, guys, what do you guys think about the medium tank? Do you like them? Do you hate them? Let me know in the comment section what you think about them, and let me know what unit you would like to see me cover next in the series. I promise, guys, I'll get to the dual strike units very soon. We only have a few units left in Advanced Wars 2 to cover. My name is Mengs. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye!